when we reflect that the rate of expansion of our universe is increasing. It was thought until Hubble that we knew it was expanding, but that surely Newton would teach us that the rate would diminish. No, the rate is increasing. The Big Bang is speeding up. We can see the end of it coming increasingly clearly, and while we wait for that, we can see the galaxy of Andromeda moving nearer towards the collision that's coming with us. You can see it now in the night sky. This is the object of a design, you think? What kind of designer in that case? To say that this must have an origin, and now we know how it's going to end, why ask why there's something rather than nothing when you can see the nothingness coming? Only replaces the question. Faith is of no use in deciding it.
Throughout the centuries, Christian philosophers and theologians have put forth many different arguments for God's existence. However, St. Augustine of Hippo's argument differs from the rest in that it is a meta-level argument. It challenges one's framework for understanding the world. His argument cuts to the core of the skeptical atheist's worldview, making it all the more tragic that it has largely been lost to time.
Hands up, Jonas.
To understand why Augustine's argument is so effective, we must first understand the skeptic's dilemma and how most arguments for God's existence fail to address the skeptic's claims. Consider closely the following parable from the Gospel of Luke. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores. The poor man died, and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and being in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes, and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his side. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him, Lazarus, to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. But Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. This resistance to the truth is what Augustine confronts in his argument for God. No matter what kind of new evidence is put forth for God's existence, true skeptics and atheists will continue to deny and distract from the truth. When presented with supernatural events, atheists will continue to provide a naturalistic explanation for the phenomenon so that it fits their worldview, instead of considering that perhaps the lens by which they are perceiving the world is wrong. Consider the following parable presented in a commencement speech by David Foster Wallace.
There are these 2 guys sitting together in a bar in the remote Alaskan wilderness. One of the guys is religious, the other's an atheist, and the 2 are arguing about the existence of God with that special intensity that comes after about the 4th beer. And the atheist says, Look, it's not like I don't have actual reasons for not believing in God. It's not like I haven't ever experimented with the whole God and prayer thing. Just last month, I got caught away from camp in that terrible blizzard, and I was totally lost, and I couldn't see a thing, and it was 50 below. And so I tried it. I fell to my knees in the snow and cried out, Oh God, if there is a God, I'm lost in this blizzard, and I'm going to die if you don't help me. And now, in the bar, the religious guy looks at the atheist all puzzled. Well, then you must believe now, he says. After all, here you are, alive. The atheist just rolls his eyes. No, man, all that was a couple Eskimos happened to come wandering by and they showed me the way back to camp. It's easy to run this story through a kind of standard liberal arts analysis. The exact same experience can mean 2 totally different things to 2 different people, given those people's 2 different belief templates and 2 different ways of constructing meaning from experience.
Think about Plato's allegory of the cave. When one is faced with challenges to their worldview, they are usually resistant and quick to deny, as the cave dwellers are in the analogy, who want to stay in the cave. Even those who are open to their worldview being challenged, like those who attempt to leave the cave, find the light of truth and the reality of the world disorienting. They may even be tempted to go back into the dark cave that they are familiar with. Truly challenging and changing one's worldview is a difficult task. As our Lord tells us, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. And later, he says, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We've seen this with the movement of higher textual criticism, where some will try to explain Jesus' miracles as naturalistic, depriving these actions from all their mystery and majesty. At first, the higher textual criticism movement appeared to be a way to help incredulous people believe the scriptures, but it has ended in creating a whole new world of atheists. Figures such as Friedrich Schleiermacher and David Strauss attempted to provide naturalistic accounts for all of Jesus' miracles. They attempted to provide so-called scientific explanations of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus' walking on water, and so on. Part of the reason for doing this appears to have been to make Christianity so-called more believable. But in actuality, they took Christ and his miracles out of Christianity, depriving the faith of its essential characteristics. This movement notably resulted in many people departing the faith generations later, the exact opposite of the intended effect. Just like the rich man in Luke's parables, sometimes we are tempted to think, if we could just present one more decisive logical argument, one more supernatural event, or one more sign, an atheist may come to faith. However, this parable seems to present that we have been given all the sufficient and necessary information for faith. Furthermore, Jesus says in Matthew 16:4, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." If someone thinks, all I need is a sign and I will believe, they're probably mistaken. Jesus makes it very clear that demanding for signs is the result of a lack of faith, which is a prerequisite for understanding, not the other way around.
So I'm not a believer in a traditional understanding of God. I would need a substantial amount of evidence to conclude that God exists beyond a reasonable doubt. I have been presented with zero good evidence ever for the existence of God. I assess logically and experience spiritually that modern AI is us building God in the literal sense.
Plenty of signs have been given, particularly in the Old Testament scriptures, also known as Moses and the prophets. Instead of asking for signs, wise figures in the Bible ask for help with unbelief, as the man does in Mark 9:24. We have easy access to the writings of Moses and the prophets, and we can see those prophecies fulfilled in Jesus. Luke writes, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead, as, of course, Jesus would go on to do, and atheists have been trying to explain away Jesus' resurrection for almost 2,000 years. As the prophet Isaiah writes, unless you believe, you will not understand, Isaiah 7:9. Put differently, hear what philosopher Slavoj Žižek has to say on this topic.
If you say, I believe in Jesus Christ because I've studied comparatively all religions, and my God, Christianity has the best arguments. If we were to be in medieval times, if somebody claims that, I would say burn him immediately. The proper Christian answer is, yes, there are reasons to believe in Christ, but to understand these reasons you have to believe.
What seems to be a paradoxical statement from the prophet Isaiah actually reveals a fundamental reality of human nature. Belief is a prerequisite of knowledge. Augustine distinguishes between belief and knowledge, positing that belief comes by hearing and knowledge comes by seeing. For example, I believe that North Korea exists, and I have no reason to doubt that it does not, but I know that the United States exists. Likewise, I can see and know that 2 + 2 = 4. but I must take far more complicated mathematical theorems on the basis of faith that they truly represent what I'm unable to see. This becomes more difficult when we ask what sort of training is required in order to see moral truths. Belief. Belief in moral truths is required to attain knowledge of moral truths. This seemingly circular or proof texting approach is the basis for the pursuit of knowledge of any field. If a child is raised in a home where science is believed to be nothing more than atheist metaphysics, he is highly unlikely to come to any form of scientific knowledge. And yet, the reality of gravity and other natural laws continue to apply to him and every other human, no matter their endless capacity for ignorance. The same is the case for moral laws. If you don't believe that lying is immoral, it's unlikely you will cease to do it, no matter how many times it brings about another miserable situation. Instead, you will continue lying, thinking that this time it will work in my favor. And yet, no matter how an individual feels or believes towards moral laws, they still govern his existence all the same. We may pretend that our language is neutral, but there is no such thing as a neutral position or level playing field when answering metaphysical questions. Terms like logic, cause, reason, etc. are loaded terms. They have built-in presuppositions about the world that one must challenge.
Newsflash, God probably isn't real. And thus, while religion has maybe excellent cultural things it does, God's probably not real. High IQ, mature individuals almost unanimously understand God not to be real. Or put it better, there is very compelling evidence that God is made up, and there's no evidence that God's real to anyone that's really, really thinking about it.
For example, the term science has often been politicized in our modern day and means different things to different people. Another example that is in our common vernacular is the term supernatural, which we used earlier in this video. The term supernatural has in it the built-in presupposition that certain events, like divine interventions or miracles, aren't natural and are somehow beyond nature. The idea when two people hear the same word, they necessarily think of the same thing is absurd. For example, when a Muslim and a Christian think of Jesus, they're thinking of two different people. A Muslim thinks of a person who is a great prophet, who is not God, and did not die on the cross. A Christian thinks of someone who is God incarnate, who died on the cross and rose again, amongst other things. It would be ridiculous to claim that both the Muslim and the Christian are thinking of the same Jesus. Rather, they have two completely different conceptions on who Jesus is, and therefore are thinking of two different people. It is clear that even the very language we use, even our own logic and reason, have built-in assumptions about the world. Perhaps it is for this reason that Martin Luther famously said that reason is the devil's whore. Similarly, Immanuel Kant wrote, "I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith." In Book 2 of his work, On Free Choice of the Will, Augustine is, in essence, responding to the following skeptical argument. 1. Given a state of mind S, among our epistemic possibilities are skeptical scenarios for S. 2. We have no grounds for discounting skeptical scenarios for S. 3. We can know that a state of mind S is veridical only if we have grounds for discounting skeptical scenarios for S. And 4, therefore, we cannot know that our states of mind are veridical. The vast majority of arguments for God, such as Thomas Aquinas' 5 Ways, Anselm's ontological argument, and Descartes' argument for God, fail to address these claims. These arguments were simply not made to address the serious challenges offered by David Hume, Bertrand Russell, and others. However, not only are they bad arguments against skeptics, but, as Kant points out, they're actually dangerous because they promote cynicism and give skeptics a way out of faith in God. In retrospect, we may reflect and see that Kant was dead on, since these stochastic or probabilistic arguments for God have been popularized. Cynicism and skepticism has exploded onto the mainstream. Further analysis into this point is worthwhile, but out of the scope of this video. Nevertheless, nobody doubted God's existence until Descartes tried to prove it. Faith in God seemed to be a given in the age before the Enlightenment, but it has since become increasingly rare in our secular society. Augustine takes a very different approach to proving God's existence. He starts his argument in Book 2 of On Free Choice of the Will through a dialogue with an interlocutor named Evodius. They begin by acknowledging that human beings have senses such as sight, touch, smell, etc. Augustine then raises the question, can we by any of our senses determine what belongs to just one sense and what to more than one? In essence, how are we able to judge our senses? We may perceive the color green, but how do we know it is green? When we touch an object while looking at it, how do we know the object we are looking at and touching are the same object? Augustine calls this faculty to judge our senses the inner sense. He writes, an animal's sense of sight is one thing. The sense by which it either avoids or pursues what it sees is quite another. And finally, Augustine argues that we have another faculty, reason, which is the thing by which we perceive everything that we know. He then establishes that we have the same sort of senses, but we each have our own individual sense of sight and hearing and so on. Likewise, we must have the same sort of inner sense and the same sort of reason, although we possess distinct rational minds. For example, while someone may have better eyesight than me, as they have their own sense of sight, our sense of sight is still the same kind of sense. We see the same objects and our senses serve the same kind of function. Furthermore, when we interact with the world, we interact with the same objects. As an example, Augustine writes, surely you wouldn't say that each of us has a private sun that he alone sees, or personal moons and stars and things of that sort. Along with our experience with the sun being universal, Augustine argues that our experience with math and numbers is universal by saying the order and truth of number is present to all who think. Using reason, which like our same sort of senses is present across humanity, we are all able to perceive and understand mathematical truths. Mathematical truths are a great example of the human use of reason, since, at least for now, most mathematical truths are universally agreed upon.
1 times 1 is what?
1 times 1 should equal 2.
Herein lies Augustine's chief example. Mathematical truths are incorruptible and judged by our minds. He says, it is by the light of the mind that I refute someone who makes a mistake in adding or subtracting. Moreover, when I perceive something with the bodily sense, such as the earth and sky and the other material objects that I perceive them, I don't know how much longer they're going to exist. But I do know that 7 plus 3 equals 10, not just now, but always. It never has been and never will be the case that 7 plus 3 does not equal 10. I therefore say that this incorruptible truth of number is common to me and all who think. There are, of course, an infinite number of these unchanging facts. Augustine just arbitrarily chooses the example that 7 plus 3 equals 10. This leads to the necessary question under the skeptical framework: How is it possible for us to know all of these unchanging facts? Augustine says, by what image or phantasm do we see so confidently this indispensable truth about number, which extends through infinitely many numbers? It is by an inner light of the mind which the bodily sense knows nothing. Augustine here is indicating that these infinite and incorruptible mathematical truths are discovered, not created. And when one discovers mathematical truths, one is recognizing a truth independent of oneself. Again, how is it possible that there are these unchanging, independent, objective truths about the world? The only way that would be possible is if there were true and unchanging rules of wisdom. In reflecting on the truth 7 plus 3 equals 10, we find that numbers transcend our minds and remain fixed in the truth itself, Augustine says. For these truths to be truly unchanging, as we believe they are, since the contrary would be preposterous. I mean, imagine if 7 plus 3 equals 10 was not true at some point in time. Somehow these truths must remain fixed in something unchangeable, independent, infinite, objective, and normative, something which Augustine calls an unchangeable truth that contains everything that is unchangeably true. If the anchor for these truths was a finite, dependent, mutable mind, we would have no grounds for saying that 7 plus 3 equals 10 is true forever. Augustine calls this grounding for our incorruptible truths simply the truth. The truth must not be inferior to our minds, since if it were inferior, we would make judgments about it and not in accordance with it, Augustine says. Similarly, the truth must not be equal to our minds, since then it would be changeable like our minds. As he writes, the truth makes no progress when we see it better and suffers no setback when we see it less. Thus, the only option is that the truth is greater than our minds. Let's summarize. There must be some grounding for our incorruptible truths we perceive through the same sort of reason. For example, 7 plus 3 equals 10. This grounding must be greater and independent of finite minds, immutable, infinite, normative, and objective. What we are describing is none other than the mind of God. As the Beatles say in All You Need Is Love, there's nothing you can know that isn't known. All is known because everything that could be conceived of is grounded in God, the All-Knowing. Everything that is objectively true must be grounded in the mind of God. This argument shows that without solid ground, alleged logic and wisdom is nothing more than foolishness, for it has no justification for being true. As St. Paul writes, "Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world?" 1 Corinthians 1:20. Therefore, to rework the previously presented skeptical argument, Augustine's argument for God may be formulated as 1. Given a state of mind S, among our epistemic possibilities are skeptical scenarios for S. 2. We can know some mental states are veridical, for example 7 plus 3 equals 10. 3. We can know that a state of mind S is veridical only if we have grounds for discounting skeptical scenarios for S. Therefore, 4. We must have grounds for discounting skeptical scenarios. The only solid ground for discounting skeptical scenarios, which Augustine calls the truth, must be independent of finite minds, immutable, infinite, normative, and objective. This is what we call God. The only solid grounding for truthful mental states is the mind of God. Therefore, it is necessary that God exists. Augustine states that our response to this realization should be joy. He writes, "One should be so overwhelmed with joy that one cannot express it in words," and later saying, "For just as the soul is the whole life of the body, so God is the happy life of the soul." Augustine's argument succeeds because it does not play the skeptical atheist game. which, as we've shown, is like playing cards against someone with a loaded deck. Rather, Augustine's argument is a comparison of frameworks. It demonstrates that ultimately, the skeptical framework is untenable. The only worldview that accurately accounts for our sense data and the truths we know is one that begins with the existence of God. Thank you for watching, and we ask that if you enjoyed this production that you would like and subscribe to our channel Living Mystery, and share this video with others who may be interested. We'll see you all in the next one.